Hello. I think network is messing with Daniel a bit. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can.
I think network
Yes,
is
I read
messing
you
with
loud.
Daniel a bit. Okay, okay. Well, it's understandable because there's no time. Everyone is busy. I wanted to partake in the assignment, but I could not even put a word down. I wanted to write something. It's been a while I wrote fiction, so I promised myself, but of course, I've been so busy. Right now, I'm still supposed to be at work, but I've managed to squeeze out 2 hours. So it's understandable. I hope the next exercise won't be rushed. At least after this session, now we will have some days to do some reading and then connect the dots and put 1,000 words down. I know it's not easy. You can imagine, putting 1,000. It's like 4 days. Not sure it was up to 4 days. It was on the 14th, and then it was due on the 18th. Okay, just about 4 days, 4 nights. So it averages at 250 words daily. And you might say 250 words is easy, but if you're writing something to make sense, something that that will trail, it's not easy to string those words together. 250 words. Okay, Daniel is back. I hope his network is better now. Daniel.
Sorry, can you still hear me? Um,
Yeah, we can hear you now.
I don't know what's going on. So I think Nigerian network is trying to mess with me. So okay, I think I was able to hear up until where Mr. Simone was saying, well, it's understandable that most of us rushed through the assignments. So like I would also implore, like he did, so we have to make out time. We have to make out time. All of us are busy. Everybody has work, obviously. So, but then we still have to make our time to get these things done, right? So because of the nature of the assignments, I think all of the entries tried in a way to interpret the theme, or to interpret the what would I call it, the prompts, yes, as best as they could. So all of the entries, that is where I would say all of the entries did a good attempt at interpreting the theme, the prompt. But then it just all of the other aspects where there were little glitches, right? So that is where I kind of have an issue with trying to examine the works. So that said, we'll proceed to we'll proceed to this week's topic. So this week we plan on talking about character and how the different forms of characters, and then how they are able to help drive our writing forward. So I'll start sharing my screen soon. I'm using my phone right now because I don't know. My laptop kind of went. So can you guys see my screen? Please, if you can see my screen, just you can mute and say yes or say anything.
Your screen was upside down.
Still,
Now
yes,
it's
we can
loading.
see it.
Sorry, I can't. Oh, okay, okay, okay. Okay, so we're going to be talking about what it takes to create a compelling character. So when we talk about writing stories, we're mostly talking about the people who exist within those stories, right? So it's also like in how real life you have people who are part of a particular community, people who are part of a particular, who belong to a particular group or who exist in a particular kind of strata, right? So it's equally the same way when you're talking about a story. A story has to be made up of characters, right? So if you don't have people who exist in these stories, you can't write a story about nothing, right? So your story has to have characters. And then that is what we're going to be talking about in today's class, right? So who is your main character? So usually the story focuses on one character or two, three, four more characters, right? Just like in the story that we are supposed to be discussing this week. So this week we're supposed to have read Trifena Yeboah's the dishwashing women, Jumpa Lahiri's sexy, and what's the third one? Yes, a party for the colonel, right? So these three stories are what we'll be discussing today in terms of what the characters in these stories looked like, how they existed or how they moved in the story, and the different qualities that these characters had. So the first question you have to ask yourself when starting out the story is who is your main character? So if you want to start out the story, you have to begin with a particular person in mind, a particular individual in mind who your story revolves around. So the protagonist of each story is who the reader will spend the most time with. So it's who they choose to go on an emotional ride with, which at the end of the story brings them to a new perspective on life. So your protagonist is who I, as a reader, it is who I am going to be spending most of the time in the story with. So if you want to hold my attention, then you'd have to introduce me to this particular person, right? It's just like, let's say, a tour guide. So you go to a new city, you're a tourist, you go to a new location, you are introduced to a particular individual who helps you navigate the new terrains, the new environment where you've just entered into, right? So that is how readers see the main character. So the main character is sort of like an eyes into what the world you are creating resembles or what it represents, right? So it's the person through which most of the story unfolds, through whose eyes the readers are able to perceive the world or environment that the story is shaped around. So the motivations and the purposes of your protagonist are what serve to drive forward the plot. But then the point of all of this, the point of we'll get into all of that very soon. How your protagonist or how your characters are supposed to have something that is driving them, how they're supposed to represent actual human beings and not to be like, I don't know how to put it, something like just a sketch, right? Something that does not have life in them. So all of that is what we're going to be talking about. In the end, the most important thing about having a character in your story is that they should have a lasting impression on the readers. So at this point, I would kind of want to ask, so out of all the stories that we read this week, did anyone have a favorite, or did anyone have a character that they were drawn to mostly, or that had a kind of lasting impact on them after they read the story? So I'm opening the floor for responses now. I want this session to be as interactive as possible, so I don't get to keep talking to myself a lot, right? Hi, can
Okay.
anyone still hear
Can you
me?
hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, of course I can.
Okay. I managed to read that section. Well written. Even though as one who is more on the non-fiction side, I felt at points, at different points, I felt the writer was overdoing it, not really overdoing it, was loading too many descriptions for her characters. Like some of the characters. Anyway, it's a short story, so I feel she was compelled to, describe all her characters. But I was particularly impressed by the main character, the Miranda also. I think her name is
Miranda.
Miranda.
Yes.
And then Miranda, yeah, the story is sexy. I managed to read that sexy. It's a nice story, but the 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 writer overdid it in some points. Even though the character Miranda was, how would I even describe her? She was a bit, would I say, ambivalent towards the relationship, because if you read from hindsight, at the end of it, she was now lukewarm towards whatever feelings she might have developed for the guy, the married man. What's his name? Deb or so. And then there was an interesting
Yes.
little boy, the little boy, Robin or Rohin. Some, yeah, and
Yes.
he was
Rohit.
supposed to be 7.
Yes.
He's supposed
Yes.
to be 7 years or so. Yeah, he's just a little bit more than a toddler, and he was able to recapture some of the some of the things he had probably witnessed from his experience, between his father and his mom, and incidentally, that was what changed Miranda's approach, Miranda's demeanor, or how will I describe it, towards the relationship she was having. So
She was
it was
having,
a
yes.
nice story. It was a nice story. But at some point, at different points, I felt there were too many details for maybe characters that you describe as flat.
Okay, that entirely makes sense. That entirely makes sense. So, when I first read Sexy was was in 2019, and I've just kept on returning to it each year. I don't know why, but like there's just something about Jhumpa Lahiri that is so particularly fascinating, right? So, but then the way you've distilled the characters, Miranda, Dev, the 7-year-old boy. So it just shows how particular you were about picking out these details, right? But then also the particularity of why you were able to pick out these distinct or these features that these characters had is based on the strength of detail that the narrator poured into these descriptions, right? So you probably wouldn't have I think I agree with you when you say there were some parts where it felt like she was kind of over describing, right? But then I also would want to look at it at the point of what about when you take out these descriptions that she had of those characters? Do you think that they would have still retained as much strength or as much effect as they did with these descriptions added to it? So, like, do you think if you take away those parts that you think were a bit too much, do you think you would have still had a fuller understanding of these characters than you do now?
Well, I don't think so. But what I was referring to was exactly the characters that really didn't impact on the story much. I could go back and give you an example. I think there was this particular one I took note of. I'll just open it. Give me a sec. Give me a sec.
Okay,
I will
sure.
open it again because it's a long story. Actually, it took me a while to read, and maybe I will still need to read
Yeah,
it
it
again
is.
over
I
and
just
over to better appreciate.
going back,
To better appreciate.
I realized that the stories that I put in the second week were kind of like really, really long. So I don't know if it just occurred to me like as I was going back on the schedule to reread the stories. But it does help when you go back to read them over and over again.
Yeah. Oh my God. This thing is now is now paywalled. On my mobile, it wasn't. It's giving me the option to pay.
No, the
It's the New
new
Yorker. Yeah, on my mobile,
yes, yes.
I read it on my mobile yesterday, and I read it through without any.
You know, they give I think one complimentary article for people that use their this thing for the first time. So
Mm, okay, possibly that was why I read it through. Okay, but yes, the details around Miranda, was why she had that effect on me as a protagonist actually in this story. She did well with the descriptions, I must say. But some of like I think when she tried to load so much on the passive lady that Miranda met in the dressing room. Can you remember
oh
that
yeah, yeah,
scene?
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
When
yeah, yeah.
in a changing
The
room?
older woman.
I
Yes.
just felt some
Yes.
the old well, I just felt some of those, and like I said, it might just be me talking from the perspective of one who is a non-fiction writer. But uh,
Yes.
I also know that if your character is flat or it's not going to take much part in your story, it would be a waste of words, trying to hit so many details for it might even put off the reader. So, but
Yeah.
to your question, I think the details attached to the protagonist, the little boy and Dev, of course, impressed me, and they had that effect on me, and that was why I took interest in them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. That's very good. That's very observational. So I would like to ask, is there any other person who read any of the other stories, even if sexy, even if any of the other stories that you read, that you want to share what character or what you noticed about the character that stood out for you the most? I mean, if there's no other person, we can as well just go ahead and continue.
Okay, Daniel, just 1 sec, 1 minute. May I just, please, I would just like to remind everyone what we are doing. We are trying to be interactive. We are trying to participate as much as we can, even though we know we are very busy. You see, these stories, I tried to read the one about the colonel or something, a party for
Oh
the
yes,
colonel.
yes.
I opened the
A party
PDF.
for
It
the
was,
corner.
yeah, it was over 20. Yeah, it was over 20 pages. It was long, a lot longer. And then I went to Sexy, and I saw it's something it's a publication in the New Yorker, and I said, okay, this is something I'll
Yeah.
read. So I'm just trying to say, if you have 3 stories, try and read one. If you read the whole, if you read the 3 or 4 of them, it's okay. because there's no writing without reading, So if we come here and we haven't read any of the stories, I mean, what are we doing? If we just try and read one. This is what I experienced through my graduate studies. They'll give you lots of resources, but the one that appeals to you, the one that interests you, read it, and then when you come to the class, the input from others who may have read other stories, you will learn from it. And if we discuss only sex here, that means we haven't done much. If someone had read the dishwashing women, we will hear from that person. I that did not read it will get some things from there. If someone had read the party for the colonel, we will also hear from that person. And this is how this thing works. It's not rocket science, as I always say. Okay, thank you, Daniel. Go on.
True. That's just to add to that. That's very true, and it also occurred to me to like talk about it today, right? Because for you to be able to develop a mind that is able to imagine widely, you also have to read widely. Like there is, like Simon is saying, it's not rocket science, right? So for you to be able to develop descriptions that are very strong, you have to read to see what other people are doing with words, right? For you to be able to sharpen your metaphors to like become really interesting to people who read it, to not just be something that reads like a draft for a newspaper, right? You have to read people who have written creatively, either for a long time or people who have gone through rigorous editing processes to get these stories out. So it helps to become a better writer by reading other writers. It's not something that can be writing is not something you can do in isolation. You don't become better by isolating yourself by just trying to. I mean, there is something inside of you, obviously, but then you are going to be able to capitalize on that and then leverage on whatever other stories that you have in several magazines that exists out there, and then you read it and then you see, oh, this is what this person was talking about in this workshop, right? The reason why the stories were selected for like why they were divided, or why I divided them into these different weeks is because I felt, oh, this particular story has this to teach about character, or this particular story has this to teach about plot and language and stuff, right? It's not something that was done because I felt that I could just fit any of these stories anyway. It was done because I felt, oh, this story fares stronger when I'm talking about this quality, right? And then this one also fares stronger when I'm talking about this element of creative writing. So it helps when we come to discussions like this, and I'm not the only one talking or conversing. It kind of becomes an interactive session as it was supposed to be. But then if nobody reads the selected or required readings, it's kind of a put off in a way, and then it shrinks the conversation. So you're not even able to gain the full experience that you're supposed to have gotten from this workshop, right? So that is also something else that I think I should talk about before we go on. Sorry.
Daniel, you seem to be
All right.
going off and on.
So we'll go ahead now. So we're talking about different categorizations of character. So characters are categorized in different ways, in different forms, right? So the categorizations based on what the roles the characters play. So we're talking about roles, we're talking about the protagonist, for an example, the antagonist, a love interest, a sidekick or confidant. So we're also talking about ensemble characters, and then also talking about tertiary characters. Like the scope of characters goes way beyond these roles that are listed here, right? But then the importance is that, well, this is mostly what you would see in most of the stories you read that the characters that are in these stories fall into one of or are playing one of these roles, right? So a protagonist character, you're talking about the main character, the universal one. Everybody knows about the protagonist, right? It's the sole character that people interact with when they are reading your stories, like the one singular person that the story is centered around, right? So when also talking about an antagonist, it's kind of the same thing as when you're talking about a protagonist. It's just that the goals or the motivations that they both have are quite different when you're looking at when you're looking at the two characters side by side, right? So an antagonist is someone who, well, obviously antagonizes, right? So there is a common goal in, say, a community or in an environment, for example. And then what this character wants is to kind of try to thwart that goal, right? So remember in the first week, we were talking about how it is important that your characters have motivations and how it is important that your stories have conflicts, right? So this is where I would say, or this is just to give an example, right? So this is how an antagonist character functions. So it's trying to sabotage whatever good that a community is doing or whatever good that a protagonist is doing, right? So when we're talking about a love interest, right? So this is kind of, so this also falls into kind of a secondary characterization, right? So a love interest is, well, maybe your protagonist exists and then your protagonist decides to go and fall in love with somebody, right? So they fall in love. The reason why a love interest character would or should exist is because you want to use that character to drive forward your narrative, right? So if the character exists and is just there, is just flat, is not doing anything spectacular, anything different to move the narrative forward, then that character should not be there. Right? It's very important that we understand this. So if you say that your main character, your protagonist, deserves to fall in love with somebody, then that love interest has to play a role in the events that occurs within the stories, right? So, for example, your main character's love interest would determine what your main character does and how these actions that they perform affects them or affects the course of the narrative, right? So I would let's say so let me try to extrapolate in the relationship between Miranda and Dev, for example, right? So Miranda is single in Jhumpa Lahiri's Sexy, and then Dev is a married man. But then obviously, by some stroke, she falls in love with him. Well, kind of a relationship that should not have happened in the first place. But then it does happen, and it's something that she quite enjoyed during the time that it lasted, right? And then she kind of wanted from the way you read the story. So each my conclusion about Miranda and whatever it was she wanted might be different from, say, Simone's conclusion on what Miranda wanted. Might be different from whoever else's conclusion of what Miranda wanted, right? But from the way I read the story, what I understood that she wanted was kind of some sort of security, right, where she could be able to kind of like exert herself, right? So she needed some sort of approval. She needed this constant approval from someone. That was why she kind of like fell in love with Dev. And then if you look at some part of the narration where the writer was comparing Dev with some of the other love interests she had when she was younger, right? So it kind of draws a parallel between these two images of people of persons that she had dated when she was growing up, and then now that she was kind of a little bit older, right? So he was kind of drawing a parallel. But then what Miranda's love interest drove her to do is that she also had an external influence that does not even include the love interest, right? So the end decision she makes, the outcome of the story toward it at the very end is something that kind of tries to avoid Dev because, well, Dev is already married, so she has to do something else with her life. She has to find someone else and not try to ruin someone else's marriage. And that is because her opinion has already been formed that despite the fact that she loves this married man, she has to also take into account what is already happening to her friend's cousin, that's Lacksmith's cousin. She has to also take that into account. She has been greatly affected by that, and then by the little boy who she has seen have an idea of what a broken family looks like. So she kind of feels guilty that she doesn't want to be the person that causes this kind of difficulty for a small child, for say Dev's wife's children or whatever. So that is why she's kind of making the decision at the end of the story to like lay off him a bit, right? So I don't know if any of this is making sense.
Yeah, I would say, okay, if you don't mind, let me just give my own
Go
impression.
ahead, go ahead.
Okay. I kind of got the impression, like I said, I will still try and reread this. I kind of got the impression that Miranda is can be described as an upright person, as a morally sound person, and she wasn't initially blown away, if I'll use the word, by Dev, but like you said, she wanted validation. She's a girl that wanted to love and be loved. And remember that Dev didn't have a wedding ring.
Yeah.
Dev didn't have a wedding ring. But when she got to learn that Dev's wife was away in India, I suspect that was when she settled with herself that, well, this wouldn't matter, And the validation you talk about, she tried to get that validation from her friend Laxmi, or I've forgotten her exact name, but it wasn't coming.
Yeah,
Laxmi was, would I even call her an antagonist? Laxmi was always narrating about her cousin's experience, Rohin's mother. So I feel she was just going along, but she fell in love and she was enjoying herself until everything unraveled with that, after the encounter with that little boy, the 7-year-old Rohin, and the whole resonance and the whole feelings, and she started giving it a thought. She now put herself in Dev's wife's shoes, and the little boy too.
Yes.
And you could see that she recollected herself, and then decided to look the other way. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. So that is to show how the impact that a particular character can have on on any writer's main character, right? So I've gone to lengths to describe this notion that if you must have a character, it just boils down to every other kind of character, like the sidekick and the confidant, the ensemble characters, the tertiary characters, right? So it also boils down to if you must have these roles, if you must have characters who play these roles, right? Then you must always make sure that they do something to drive the story forward. They must have a role that they play in that story. Because if they don't have a role, then there is no point in them existing. I would have really loved if someone read Tryphena's The Dishwashing Women, right? So, well, just to break down the sidekick confidant character. So in The Dishwashing Women, right, it's about dishwashers that live in a big man's house. So that the man has money, is able to send poor people's children to scholarships to study on scholarships to study abroad. But then he's not doing this in sort of like an upright manner. So he's doing it in sort of requesting a favor from the young girl. So he's luring them into clandestine behaviors for him to be able to offer them this kind of safe haven, right? So how our protagonist enters the story is that her daughter and her daughter has already has had a relationship with a man, and currently her daughter is now abroad studying, right? But all of this, and then all of this, our main character has a best friend who she also drags into the rich man's house to come to work as a dishwasher. The point of coming to the man's house to serve as a dishwasher is, well, perhaps in the man's understanding, so that he's offering them help. But then from the way she sees it, she's trying to get revenge on the man for having harmed her daughter emotionally, right? So all of that. And if you read the story, I hope we do go back to read the stories eventually. When you read the story, you realize how our main character, I think her name was Aisha, I guess, and then her best friend, who both worked as both worked as dishwasher at the man's home. You find out how the relationship blossomed over the years, and then in the end, something significant happens that tells you, oh, these two people are no longer the same way they started off as the beginning, right? So the story flits between the narratives of different women. So it follows the main character, her best friend, the main character's daughter, one other person that joins them to work as a teacher. So all of that sort of thing. But then what I wanted to point out in that story was the relationship between our main character and her sidekick, and then how that affected their relationship in the long run, right? So to the next part, we'll be talking about characters by development and arc. So another means of categorizing characters is in examining how they are changed within the course of the story. So when you arrive at the end of your story, you'd have to ask yourself, do characters achieve their goal? Does their goal change into something different, or do they lose focus of whatever motivation that they started out with in the first place? So the answer to all of these questions boil down to who your character is and how they exist as an entity within whatever situation that you've already put them into. So on these basis of character categorization by development and arc, is where you would have the dynamic characters, that is, the characters who undergo some sort of transformational change, whether positive or negative change, right? So we sort of, well, to go back to Miranda, she's, I don't know, I wouldn't say she was transformed, or just as Simone has already pointed out, whether she has always been an upright person, right? But then all of that, but then I'm trying to find a story that almost everybody knows that I can use as an example, but I don't think I can come up with that kind of of example of an already written story. But then we're talking about dynamic characters or characters who have undergone a sort of transformational change. In terms of positive ways, we're talking about people who started out as, say, having some sort of ulterior motive, but then ended up having, after having gone through a lot of things, having experienced a lot of obstacles, decide, oh, this bad thing that I started off wanting in at the very beginning is not something that is beneficial, or something that I want at this point in time. Sorry. So I think an example that I can think of is Mr. Grinch. I don't know if we're familiar with Mr. Grinch's story, how he hated Christmas and all of that. And then in the end, so it's a movie actually. In the end, he ends up, well, being receptive to the idea of a celebratory or festive period like Christmas. So all of that is how a character can change, or how a character undergoes a transformation to change from a sulking person to a jovial person, a sad person to a happy person, or it can be in the other direction, right? It can be moving from this very outgoing person to someone who is very reserved as a result of some particular form of trauma that has happened, that has occurred within the period that the story has lasted for. So we're also talking about in terms of development, in terms of the development, we're talking about flat or static characters. So these are characters that don't necessarily undergo any transformational change. So they don't bring anything new into who they were before the story happened, right? So all of the responses that we get from flat or static characters are responses that they would naturally have given in any other kind of situation, right? So they're not acting based on a new occurrence. They're not changing in any way. They're not being transformed in any way. So it's just like and you mostly get this kind of characters in, say, thriller movies, for example. If you are talking about well, if you're talking about a character who already exists within a crime world, right? So the character has already existed within a crime world and has acquired acquired some certain level of skills to be able to combat criminals or to fight bad people, all of that stuff. And then when any other kind of when any form of challenge or obstacle presents itself within that environment they exist in, they're not doing anything necessarily new or anything out of the ordinary to kind of like combat that challenge, right? So they are still essentially the same person they were before the story started, during the course of the story, and then at the end of the story. So flat and solid characters do not really make for when you are trying to write literary short fiction. They may make interesting or compelling cases when you're talking about writing thrillers or when you're talking about writing crime action, right? For example, so symbolic characters are characters who exist in a narrative because they represent something. So they are existing. They're not there to signify just one person. They are there because they're kind of like an allusion to a lot of other things, right? So they can represent, it may be one particular person representing a tribe, or it may be one particular person representing a country, a particular group of people, right? So it's just you as a writer distilling all of the features that you can imagine about this particular group of people into just one particular individual and having them embody it, right? So am I still making sense up until this point?
Yeah, yeah. Even though you break up at times,
Yes, go
you could
on.
change your position.
Oh, okay. So I would say at whichever point where you stop hearing me, please, I don't know, try to call my attention. Like if it's for an extended period of time, please do try to call my attention, please. I'm so sorry. I apologize on behalf of Nigerian network service providers.
I think it's okay. Yeah, it's okay on this side. It's perhaps network on Simoni's side. I could hear you clearly from here.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So we'll go ahead. So in literary fiction, right, in the best characters that you notice in any work of fiction that you read are characters that are relatable. Like the reason why people talk about there's this book, Nearly All the Men in Lagos Are Mad. I have not read it yet. I think I've read snippets of it. I've read parts of it, but I've not read the full. I have not read it in entirety. But then from what I've read, from the little I've read, the reason why people are able to to talk about this book for this extended period of time is because of how the characters are so relatable, right? I mean, if you look at a catchy title as Nearly All the Men in Lagos Are Mad, it's something that has always been perpetuated in pop culture, something that has always perpetuated like throughout conversations on social media. It's something that people have already internalized in themselves. Oh, Yoruba demons, oh, Lagos men are cheats, right? And then you see all of these things compounded in the form of a book. So it's something that people are able to relate with very well. That is why that book has garnered that amount of success that it has um, in recent times, right? So the best characters in any literary work are the ones that mimic real people. So over the course of this lecture, we'll be talking about how you can make your characters more real. So characters that people relate with are not necessarily characters that sound cardboard cutouts, like you just I don't know, like you kind of try to use description to just describe what the character looks like, that they're able to, that I'll be able to say, oh, this is what this person looks like, right? That is not what relatability means. What relatability means when you're talking about characters in literary fiction is that this character has a certain personality, right? This character has features that distinguish him from this other person, features that are peculiar to him, features that make him, seem like a real person. They do things that real people would do. So, right, like characters with prejudices, that have inconsistencies, characters who are biased maybe towards a particular group of people, towards a particular gender, right? So all of these make for relatability, but also characters who have a background or a life that you're living prior to the beginning of your story, right? So you always have to remember that at the point where your story has started is not where that character's life has started existing. So it's just like in Jumpo Lahiri's Sex. I'm using Jumpo Lahiri's Sex because that is the one that we've talked about the most. That is one that um, has been read, even if it's just by one person. So in Jumpa Lahiri's Sexy, when Miranda's life, when the story starts, it did not start when Miranda's life started, right? It was not at the point where the story began that Miranda's life started. So Miranda has already had a life prior to the start of the story, right? So every other thing that you see happen in the story is a distillation of who Miranda is, who she has been as a person, right? So your characters carry all of that thing into your story. They carry all of their life experiences, everything that every trauma that they've had passed through in life, every form of difficulty that they've experienced in life. So they carry all of that into the story, and then you start from there to start building up. Okay, this is what happens here, and this is what happens next, and then all of that you're able to build on all of that to like tell your story, right? So characters who have grief, characters who have unresolved trauma, or characters who hate the world around them or hate their current fate and are seeking for ways to change them. So all of these are characters that make for compelling narratives, right? So if you think about characters who say hate the world around them, that pretty much describes most teenagers, young people growing up who hate the way things are around them and who would want to change, if not the immediate environment, they would want to change the world, right? So all of these makes for relatability. So they're able to bring all of these into your character and then say, oh, this is what this is what this person looks like, then you are going to be able to write a character that resonates with people the most. And the reason why I'm trying to dwell on this is because so I would want all of us to go back after this lecture and like try to assess the stories that we've written from the first week again, right? So find out where you're falling short in the characters you've created. So in as much as I said that the entries or the submissions kind of paid obeisance to the prompt, right? There was not much in terms of characterization that existed in these stories. And then given the fact that the entries were significantly rushed, there was not much in terms of content, right? I couldn't root for any particular character that I read. Like even when you're describing a mute mom of a 5-year-old, I couldn't particularly say, oh, okay, this is how this person arrived to this point where she was, right? I can't preempt what her life was like, if her life had always been like that, if she had always been mute from birth, or if she had kind of acquired it or while growing up, or how that has affected her life, right? It wasn't significant enough for me to be able to root for the character. And then also when we're talking about someone who walks into a barber shop to cut their hair, right? And then you're trying to relate it back to who they were before this point. I felt like there could have been a kind of, so I'm just giving a blanket feedback. I believe the writers who had these stories are kind of picking up the information I'm dropping, right? So I felt like in terms of the individual who went into a barber shop to cut his hair, like in as much as, well, you use the prompt, a barber shop, right? So in as much as that happened, the character did not have a cohesive point where you say, oh, this is what had happened to them before. You tried to describe that, like there was a brief description of that, but then it did not clearly show that this is what had happened, or what kind of person was your character before all of these started happening. And then what impact has the life that they had lived before, what impact did it have on like who they are now, right? Or where they are existing now. And then what relationships do they have in the past? And then what impact does it have now? So even when you're trying to balance all of that, it was just a bit murky, right? So when we're done with this lecture, right, it will be very important that all of us go back to the drawing board and then think more clearly on who our characters are, and then how they're going to be able to leave a lasting impact on our readers, right? So next we'll be talking about the elements of character. So character elements are just like compass needles that, well, nobody uses a compass again anymore. But then they're just like maps, for example, that point us in the direction of a character's total being, right? So it's akin to the way you'd identify a friend or someone you've known for a while. It's kind of like how you'd say, oh, this person is capable of this, and this person is incapable of this. It's also akin to how you'd how you'd say, or how a friend can call you on your phone with a different number, and you immediately tell, oh, this is this person's voice, right? So you immediately recognize, so you immediately recognize that this is this person, this particular friend speaking, and not the other person, right? So all of that is kind of the elements that you've been able to pick up about your characters, about your friends, right? So your characters are supposed to be like your very close friend. So you're supposed to know, if not everything, but a fundamental amount of information to be able to write a particular character. So it's something like their manner of speaking, the choice of words they use in a particular setting or mood, or their reactions to events that occur in the extremes, the reserved nature of their expressions around strangers. All of these indicates like who your characters are and how the stories of their lives up until that moment has affected them. So if we remember in in Vladimir Nabokov's Symbol and Signs, I think there was a passage where I left. That was the story we read in the previous week. There was a passage where I left a comment. So where I said about an attitude that the husband portrayed whenever he was anxious. So I left a comment, and I noted I was going to come back to it in this second week. So I said, give your characters habits, right? It's something that makes them very human. Like habits are the core of every human behavior, and then habits are formed from experiences. if you think back to most of the habits that you have now, most of those habits are formed out of whatever particular experience that you've had, either growing up or either whenever, right? So most of the things that you formed as a habit today, most of the things that you do, even if unconsciously, are things that you've always they were like they just came as a result of a particular experience that you've had, right? Like if you are hypersensitive to, let's say, hypersensitive to a loud bang, it may probably have been due to you having experienced a, say, bank robbery before, where robbers entered the banking hall and started shooting guns in the air, or you wouldn't even have had to have experienced that. Maybe you heard something like something very violent, and then your brain immediately registers that sound to represent some other kind of sound that you are overly wary of. You become overly wary of that sound in the future. So all of these are how habits are formed. If you are the kind of person who tap their feet repeatedly whenever they are anxious, it's something that you learn maybe as a coping mechanism, or something that you just unconsciously started doing, right? So all of these are the things that help to make your characters very relatable. So again, at the core of every human behavior, there is a habit, right? So if you give your character a particular habit, right, it kind of makes people to be able to relate to that character more. So also, characters should not exist in a vacuum, otherwise they would not be relatable. So why does your character behave like this instead of another? So these are the characteristics, and finding out what these elements are will ultimately determine what your story is about and how much it matters to people, right? Like, say, so what I'm trying to talk about here is that when I say characters should not exist in a vacuum, is I'm saying your character should not your character should not have the same quality when they are in different groups, or when they are in different localities or different settings or in different environments, right? It's sort of like when so again, back to Sexy by Jumpa Lahiri. When Miranda is with Lakshmi, she tends to be more agreeable, right? The way the conversation flows, she doesn't want to oust herself as the kind of person who would sleep with another woman's husband, right? But then when she's not with Lakshmi, when she is with, say, Deb, for example, she kind of wants to show her, she kind of wants to be her freer self, kind of wants to flirt, right? So these are two different, this is the same character, but then having two different personalities, if I would call it that, having two different personalities at two different instances, right? So the person who she is with this person is not the person who she is with when she is with another person. That is kind of what I'm trying to say when I say your character should not exist in a vacuum. So people have contradictions, people have inconsistencies with them. I may go out with a group of people who I consider very close friends. I may go out with them to a bar, and I'm able to to speak freely, to act freely, to behave anyhow I want in whatever manner that I want. But then when I'm with a different group of people, I don't tend to act in that kind of way, because I don't know who these people are, right? I don't know what their intentions of me or how they would perceive my actions. So all of that are the things that make, so when are the things that make your characters to be more grounded in reality. So what, sorry, can I still be heard up till this point?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right. So I'll be talking about the elements of a three-dimensional character. So what are the things that make your character to be three-dimensional? So physical descriptions help a lot, right? So when you are trying to explain who a person is to maybe I've not seen this person before, and then you are trying to explain who this person is. You are trying to describe, say, Emmanuel to me, or you are trying to describe Becky to me, or trying to describe Simone to me. You can't just say a dark man. I mean, there are so many dark people in the world, right? You'd have to give more specific descriptions in terms of their physicality. So, what do they look like? I mean, in terms of what they look like physically, their eyes, the shape of their head, like all of that are important, right? So it helps people to create a particular image of what a character is like. It's also like the way you'd read Adichie's purple hibiscus and gets an image of Eugene, and then you come online and then you see people who are saying that the book should be made into a movie, and they are casting Richard Moffat Damijo as Eugene, right? That kind of creates a sort of contrast between the Eugene that was represented in the book and the Eugene that they want to cast in the movie. So something like that. So physical descriptions help people to associate with characters. And it's something that people have always associated, like say Catholic fathers are too strict, or that short men are too wicked, something like that. So it helps people to, it's in a way trying to, even if in a way it's trying to foster what is it called, cliches, right? Like the way in Sexy, the way Lakshmi is always eating a spicy snack, which is usually used to describe Indians. Even in a way, it kind of fosters cliche, but then sometimes cliches are true, right? And then when you're writing a character who belongs to this particular sect, you'd have to kind of make, not in an offensive way, you'd have to kind of make that representation so obvious, right? So physical descriptions help a lot when you are describing your character. So they kind of also highlight what a character's history has been, and sometimes it often foreshadows how a character will thrive in a given situation. Like if you say that your character has a scar on their head, or that your character has only one eye, right? It creates a kind of curiosity as to why does this character have only one eye, and how did this scar come about, right? So it immediately piques your reader's interest, and they want to know more. They want to know why this character has this scar. Why is this scar important to us also? So like I keep mentioning, anything that you mention about your character has to have a role that it plays, right? Otherwise, take it out. So if it doesn't play any particular role, if it doesn't further the narrative, if it doesn't tell us more about your character, there is no reason why it should exist in that story. So it's also important when you are describing a character's physical qualities to employ the different senses, right? You're employing the senses of sight, of smell, of taste. I mean, you wouldn't just a character. So, but then you're employing the senses of sight, of feeling, right? So, what does if you see, it's just like in Trifena's the dishwashing women, when she describes the richer woman as having smooth skin, it immediately tells you that this is someone who comes from money, right? Even if it doesn't bear telling anyway. Whenever you see someone being described as having smooth skin, or having silk smooth skin, or having jet dark hair that curls over their body, all of that sort of description, it really tells you something about that character's background, that they have money or that they don't have money. When you see someone is being described as having a disheveled hair, when you see someone being described as having shrunken skin, for example, all of that already plays into how you would identify that character, or what social class would you place this character into, right? So secondly, personality. So the personality of your character tells readers about your character's demeanor or temperament. So are they always angry? Are they always moody? Is your character shy? Is your character a talkative? Is your character reckless? Is your character impulsive? All of that. Is your character indecisive? So all of that are the things that will decide how your character reacts to any particular obstacle that you've placed them, or you've placed in their way. So last week we talked about how obstacles are important in propelling your characters to do stuff. So when you have a character who is shy and who is very reserved, and then you have a very huge obstacle placed before them, the character can do two things. The character can decide to come out of their shell and try to fight that obstacle, or the character can just decide, oh, this goal is not even as exciting as it is in the first place, so I can just relax and go back to remain in my shell and decide to pursue something else, right? So all of these, it just the way your character is going to react to something is why it's important that you tell readers, or that you show readers early on, what their personality is. It kind of helps to preempt how they're going to react. It also kind of helps to create an element of surprise in terms of when a character unexpectedly does something, right? So if you show us how these features affect the overall personhood of your character and how it affects their interaction with others, that is, it's going to help to strengthen the story that you are telling. It's going to help readers to be able to resonate with your characters more. So because this is important, because as the story progresses, as it goes on, readers want to see how these characters evolve at the end. Right? So almost all of these are things that have kind of been touched on in a way. So we're talking about background too. Where does your character come from? Do they come from a line of money? Do they come from a very poor family that would make them want to break out of poverty, do anything they can at whatever cost to be able to break out of poverty, something like that. So these details, all of it shape how the characters are able to move into their future. Right? For example, where was your character raised, or who raised your character? Which will also refer me back to the 7-year-old boy in Sexy, right? So we're talking about how this character is real, or who raised this character. You're going to see that this is a very precocious child who is able to pick up even the slightest of details. And then something that has been picked up at this early stage is something that sticks immediately, right? So it's something that they're going to grow up, and they won't let go of that notion that they've had when they were little. So if someone asks Rohin, for example, what is the meaning of sexy, he's probably going to say in adults that being sexy is going, even when he knows the actual definition of the word, he's still going to, at the back of his mind, have, oh, sex means falling in love with a woman who you don't know, right? So that has kind of created a lasting impression on him. And then all of that is going to, you wouldn't be surprised, or it may take some kind of work if it grows up to become in some type of way unstable, or if it turns out to be to try to not be like his dad, right? So something like that. So all of these are the things that would kind of help your readers to understand who your characters are and what they are going to do, or who they are going to become in the future. So another important element of a three-dimensional character are the words and the actions that this character has performed. Right. So you would use yourself as an example, even. It's not all the time that you see something that comes into your mind, right? So you may want to respond in a very bitter manner to a particular statement from someone. And then you decide in your head, nah, it's not worth it. And then you just go for something more sarcastic instead. while inside of you, you are roiling with anger. So all of that. Real human beings are full of contradictions. So nobody says exactly what they are thinking. I don't know. Maybe you do. I don't. I don't say exactly what is in my mind. Like I believe most persons do this. So before you give a response to anything, you've already filtered it through different means to like arrive at a particular answer that suits the particular situation that you are in. So all of that too, you'd have to try to replicate that in your fiction. That is what makes for very interesting characters. So in response to questions, people tend to pick and drop details, like I've already said. People tend to, depending on who is asking the question or where they are. So you have to account for the fickleness of humans in in your writing. Say someone says this now, and then in a different context or in a different scenario, they are retracting that statement and saying, "Oh, I never said this. I said something else." Right. So all of that contradictions are something that you'd have to bring into your writing, into your character's life. So you don't want to create a character that is too whitewashed or that is too perfect. You don't want to create a character that is a saint, because no human being is a saint, right? So your characters also should have motivation. What are the things that interest your character? What are the things that move them, that pique their interest? So people often tend to do this thing where when they are creating a character sketch for any story they're writing, they try to find out what does their character like to eat in the morning, what is their character's favorite music or movie. All of that stuff is okay, but do I do it? I think it helps sometimes. There are times when so I'm speaking from experience. There are times when I'm writing a particular character who upon whom I've fostered a particular kind of trait that I do not have. And for me to be able to kind of tap into the energy that I think that character would have, I'd have to listen to a particular kind of music that I believe that character that I'm describing would most likely listen to. I'm not the usual I'm not the usual Nigerian Afrobeats person, right? But then there are some characters that I would want to write, and then it just occurs to me that, oh, this character might be someone who enjoys listening to Afrobeats, who enjoys listening to, say, Charlie Poppy, for example, and then, or who enjoys listening to Duncan Mighty or Timaya, for example, and then, or I'm trying to write a story that is set in a particular year, and I would have to go back to, say, 2013 Whiskey or 2013 Davido, right, to kind of get the feel of what that character, how that character would react, say, in that given situation, in that particular setting, right? So these are the kind of things I'm talking about when creating when writing a character that has a personality, right? So they have to have a motivation. So what brought me to talk about is the motivation of your character. So what motivates them? What is your character like or dislike, right? Do they like honesty? Do they dislike people who are sluggish, people who are always forthright? So what are they trying to get away from? Maybe from their past, or maybe some kind of wahala that they've entered. What are they trying to get themselves to run away from? And then what do they want to accomplish? And then how badly do they want to accomplish this goal? So it's an important thing to note, right? Your characters must always want something. So if you go back to, say, the assignments that you've written for the first week, you try to ask yourself these questions in terms of, what does your character want, right? What does this character that you've written, what did this person want? And how badly did they want this? And were they able to achieve this at the end of your story? Right? You can say maybe 1,000 words is too short for you to explore this. I don't think so, right? I don't think so that that it is too short to explore all of this. It's just like kind of something that would help you to exercise your thinking capacity, your ability for creativity. It's just something that will help you to practice. So it's not as if you are necessarily competing for a prize. You must have to write a lot of trash to be able to write something that is spectacular. Right? So if you don't practice as much as you can, there is no way you're going to write as well as you ought to. So you have to write the trash first, and then you'll be able to write better things in the long run. And then also, I think I should say at this point that the first draft of a story that you've written is not the best draft. So in the first draft, we're just trying to get the story out. This is just a digression from our conversation on character. In the first draft, you're just trying to get the entire story out. What happens, what does not happen, right? That is what the first draft is about. And when you start talking about, when you start thinking of putting things together in pieces, it has to come in the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth draft, right? So there has to be different revision processes for you to be able to get out work that you are satisfied with. And sometimes you may not even be satisfied with that particular work. You may not be fully satisfied with that particular work in the long run. Then at least you know that you've done your due diligence to that particular story. So you've done something that you can say, oh, I've done the best I can for this story. I think it's time for me to let it go at this point, right? So also when you're thinking of characters, you're also thinking of conflict. So conflicts are of two types, the external and the internal conflict. And then the one that people most often relate with is internal conflict, which I have a slide of that later forward down, right? So when we're talking about external conflict, you'd have to understand that humans are often in conflict with each other and even with themselves, right? So the gamut of all human interactions revolve around conflicts, series of conflicts. So what are these characters trying to resolve either amongst themselves or within themselves, right? That makes for conflict. Say your character and her neighbor are not in good terms, right? Why are they not in good terms? What happened that broke whatever cordial relationship that they had in the first place, right? So all of that are the questions that you'd have to answer when you're talking about external conflict. So then brings me to the last part, which is change. So you'd have to show the readers what's left of your characters at the end of the story. Essentially, how has their life been altered by whatever journey that you've set them on? So the path you've set them on, how has it changed their life? How has it changed their outlook on things? So all of that is going to be determined by the character sketch that you formed prior to writing your story. Sorry, can I still be heard at this point?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I kind of wanted us to discuss, I think we've had this discussion, but I kind of wanted us to ponder on the characters from the stories we've read so far and try to talk about what we remember about them, which details stood out for you the most, and then are these features tied in any way to the above elements that, that we've discussed. So even if it's not for, so I don't know how I'm going to do this now. Um, so even if it's not for the stories for this week, can anyone think of even the story that we read in the previous week with a character that stood out for them, say from Raymond Carver's A Small Good Thing or Vladimir Nabokov's Symbols and Signs, or from Jared Lemus's Saint Dismas. So does anybody have a character that stood out for them in any of these stories that we read in the previous week? Abi, you people did not go back to read them.
Sorry, can you come again, Daniel? Can you just come again?
So I was asking, like, given the fact that many persons here did not read the stories we were supposed to read this week. So this discussion was supposed to be like for us to talk about the the characters from the stories we've all read so far, right? So what do you remember about them? Which details stood out for you the most? And then are these features that you recognize, are they in any way tied to any of the above elements that we've already discussed? So I'm asking, even in terms of Raymond Carver's A Small Good Thing, Jared Lemus's St. Dismas, or Vladimir Nabokov's Symbols and Signs. So are there any characters from the stories you've read, either the last week or this week, that stood out for you the most? So I would like for us to talk about these characters in terms of the elements that has already been described above. So
Well,
other than that,
the only thing I can remember. Oh, sorry. Okay, go on.
no, go on.
In Nabokov's story, I think he mentioned something about a habit that that the husband had. He mentioned that I've forgotten. I think making a circle with his finger or something like that. He mentioned the habit. I've forgotten the exact habit, and it was the wife. Was the wife from the wife's perspective that habit was mentioned. Something he does when he's not when he's not happy, when he's
Yeah,
angry.
when he's anxious. Yes,
I've forgotten.
yes,
Either making a gesture with his, but if I go back, I'll pick it up. That is.
yes, yes.
I know if I go back to this sexy again, I could pick out something around the
Okay,
element
okay,
we just discussed. Yeah. Thanks.
okay. That's very good. I think we should start awarding um, best students. I don't know for this work, yo. And maybe in the next week we'll start. We'll have to look into it because you can't be the only person that is responding in terms of these discussions.
No, I
So,
think someone else might just follow up.
oh, okay. Well, I'll give. I think word is already behind schedule, but I'll give a few. I don't know if any other person has anything else to say. Otherwise, we'll just keep it moving.
Becky has raised her hand. I think you pass the mic to Becky. Becky, go on.
Okay, thanks for the talk about relatable characters, elements of a character, and other things you mentioned. You were asking for an example example of a character that we could relate with. I typed popular discourse, like a character that started with a particular kind of character and then later changed towards the end of the story. I was thinking the lady in Purple Hibiscus. Well, what's that her name again? The main character, like
Can't
she was
believe.
I can't believe, yes. She was taking it all and acting, and she couldn't respond, and all of a sudden, she's also doing things that, um, should I say, are not morally right, or like dating not dating, like falling in love with the priest, although she couldn't control that. But that's gone. I wanted to make an observation for our classes or these sessions. Can we have I know we didn't get to, like someone like me, I did not get to read any of the stories because this week was choked up with too many things, so there was no time to breathe. But if we can make our classes, even if it's not talking about the stories, more like a classroom. you know we have different personalities, and some of us easily get disinterested or lose attention when one person is doing the talking and then the others are not imputing something. So it could be something as simple as can we give a thumbs up if you understand something that would make us participate in a way, like we are putting something. There's an input from us too, even if it's just like all those things you're describing, characters, you giving examples. Or there's some things you could tell us about it, but we might also want to talk about it. So maybe we could just give the space. Okay, can somebody say what he or she thinks about this. So I believe that will make us know experience. Sometimes some other people might say something that might actually stir up a discussion or argument that would benefit everyone. So I would like the sessions to be more interactive. We are imputing something, so we don't get lost or sleepy or lose attention along the way. Thank you very much. I really gained a lot from today's session, and I
Okay,
promise
thank
I'll
you.
read the stories from now.
Okay, thank you very much, Becky. So I'll be reserving the comments for the last 15 minutes. So that's why I said we're already behind schedule. So this is 3:40. So I have barely 5 minutes conclude to conclude my long talk because I'm already talking too much. So in the next 4 minutes, we'll be having room for conversations on anything that anybody has any question on or would want me to throw more light on, right? So I think the remaining of these slides are things that I've already talked about before in terms of developing a character sketch. So if you need to create characters that are alive and breathe not just on but off the page, it is paramount to have a character sketch, either in your head or on a rough book, where you can pour out whatever the basic details that you have or that you know about your character. And it's also important to know that characters do not come to writers fully formed, right? So there are characters that may come to you and you know everything about them already, and then there are other characters that you just have just a little background information on them, and then you have to discover the rest about them as you write. Right. So in terms of that, even sometimes the things that these characters do might surprise even the writer. So that is why it's important to create character sketches, but then not to be too rigid about your sketch or not to be too limited in terms of what your character is able to do and then what they're not able to do. Right. So when I was talking about conflict, I mentioned two types of conflict, the internal and the external conflict. So in terms of internal conflict, it's something that is very vital in any work of fiction. If your character does not have an internal conflict, then I don't know. I don't know if that story would resonate with me. I'm speaking for myself. I don't know if that story would resonate more with a lot of readers, even. But so an internal conflict occurs when a character experiences tension within themselves. So you have a lot of these, even in normal human beings. So it's often referred to as the man versus the self. It involves the characters experiencing opposing needs, desires, or values. Right? It can represent a conflict between an individual's subjective knowledge or preconceived beliefs and then their hearts upon encountering new information. It's just like, say, someone who's already had the notion about abortion not being a sin and then having to encounter new knowledge about how abortion is essentially the mother of the murder of young children, something like that. I'm not saying that is what it is, but I'm just trying to give an illustration, right? So this can include struggles about their relationships, their religious beliefs, their works, and societal values, right? So all of these are the things that include an internal conflict. So the last thing I would also want to talk about is subtext. So I think it's something that we can read up. It's something that is implied in a text. So it's kind of like an underlying message about something that is not explicitly stated or an undersurface kind of detail, right? So remember when I said that people don't always see what is on their mind. People are not always immediately speaking out what they think, right? So it's kind of related when we're talking about subtext. So when we're talking about writing subtext, is like giving your readers the avenue to do some sort of fill in the blank spaces exercise that we normally do in school. So it means giving readers not the entire information, but then a bit of information that is just enough to get them to keep on reading and forming their own meanings as they go on. So there is an example here. So in subtext, what we are trying to do is to leave room for interpretation. Right? You're not trying to be didactic with your prose. You're trying to allow your prose to be open to interpretation, right? So people can be able to infer, oh, this is what or what kind of person this person is, and then this is what they were trying to achieve. And then another person can bring in another subjective idea, right? That this is not necessarily how they understood this story to be, or how they understood this character to be. So the subtext is sort of like something that you don't say, or something that you imply, and then you'd have to allow the readers to figure it out by themselves. You're not spoon feeding the readers to arrive to, like, you're not during them all of this just to bring them to this particular destination. You're allowing them to take the journey by their own hands, and to arrive at this to draw their own conclusions by themselves. So finally, how do you know that you've arrived at a satisfactory end for your story? So when you've employed all of these elements that we've been talking about from the very first week, in terms of character, plot, structure, all of that, language and style, how do you know that you've arrived at a satisfactory end for your story? Personally, I don't know, right? I don't know when I've arrived at the ending of the story. But then I've always been trying to work with what George Saunders wrote in his newsletter, which is a very informative resource for writers. George Saunders writes that an ending is one beyond which no new meaning presents itself. So how you know you've arrived at a particular a good ending for you, so is when there are no longer, you run out of what ifs, right? You can no longer answer a what if question, or and then what, something like that. When you no longer have any and then what happens question, then that is how you know you've arrived at a satisfactory ending. But then even with all of this, so personally, I've written stories where I go back and I'm like, oh, what if this story did not end this way? What if it had ended in another way, right? And several writers allude to that they don't necessarily have any particular ending that they want, or they don't necessarily find an ending that is generally satisfactory for themselves, particularly, right? But they just choose the one that seems the most logical to the story, and that is how they know that they've arrived at a satisfactory ending. So this is the point where I stop my presentation and throw the room open for people who have questions. So you can ask your question if you have any questions. So I see Peace has raised her hand already. So Peace, you can go ahead with your question. Thank you very much.
Sorry, that was a mistake.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Let me just thank you, Daniel, for a very another lengthy one. Like we'll try and make this more interactive. And let me just add before I lose my train of thoughts, let me just add an observation, like what you said about endings. There could be alternate endings. This is why I try not to be boxed into definitions. I'm not really a fan of definitions, you know. You can define or try to describe when you come to an end, to the end of your story, like you just quoted a writer now. Yes, but you see, things have different perspectives, and I try not to be limited to, you know, a particular one. It's just, for instance, like Game of Thrones. That's why we have alternate endings. You see, movies, you know, screenwriters, they come up with alternate endings. Like Game of Thrones, a lot of people did not like the ending, but for me, I said, I told myself, if this R.R. Martin put in so much work and ended the story like this, who am I to, you know, start disputing and start putting down the last episode or the last season. This man wrote thousands and thousands of pages with hundreds of characters, scenes, and developed it up till that end. I mean, does it really make sense to say that this man did not try various ends? Okay, let it be that the one appeal to him was what he gave us. It's just like what Chinua Achebe will say. If you don't like my story, go and write your own. You know, writers can be that arrogant. So when I see people condemning Game of Thrones, something that gave you 3 or 4, 6, 7, even 8 seasons up to the last episode, and you want to say, because it didn't end the way you want it, that the ending was trash. It doesn't really make sense for me. You know, for me, the ending was 101%. There was no way, no other way, no other person could have taken that throne. If it was Jon Snow, it could have been too obvious. I don't know if you guys are fans of Game of Thrones, but if Jon Snow ended up being, because he died and he was raised, so it was looking like he would be the one to take that. So if Jon Snow had ended up as the king or the ruler of the Westeros or the whole realm, it would have been a bit obvious, too obvious for me, because I put him as one of the characters that will take up that role. So endings can be neither here nor there, and I would personally prefer leaving an ending to, you know, different interpretations. So much so that a new story can emerge, just like you said, a new story can emerge on a different day. You might have a whole new experience, and then go back to your story, and then you say to yourself, look, I ran out of what ifs, I ran out of, and then, but now I have something I can start with, you know. So thank you. I might just also say that I'll take my leave shortly because I have to get back to work. So please.
Okay, thank you so much for that, and thank you for your presence. So I'll just say
I'm
shortly that. Oh, okay, thank you so much. I'll just add shortly that George R. Martin never liked the ending of Game of Thrones, but I get what you are saying. I did enjoy the end. I think it was quite satisfactory, right? But then, other than that, I see why people would have a problem with the ending of Game of Thrones, for example. So also, it's just like I said, definitions are made based on, just like you said, made based on people's experiences, right? So it's made based on what people have practiced for a long time, and then it works for them, and then they form a definition. So not everything would work for you. Not everything that any famous writer has said would work for you. So the best thing to do with writing advices is to weigh them up with your style as a writer or with what your goal as a writer is, and then you can decide, oh, this works for me, this does not work for me, right? So personally, I don't have any particular idea of where a satisfactory ending for a story has been, right? But then I've had stories rejected from magazines because they said that the ending was loose, or that the ending was not perfectly outlined, something like that, like the event did not come to a definitive close. So, and that is important in short story. The reason why it's important is that you wouldn't have the opportunity to explore a lot of other things. So that is why you have to try as much as possible to choose an ending that is more resolute in terms of what is happening in that particular moment, right? So that's just what I would have to add to that. I think someone else, that Bami Kole, you can speak now.
Good evening. Sorry, good afternoon. I have a question, but it's not 100% related to today's class. First of all, you mentioned some books, right, that we're supposed to be reading. How do we know the books we're supposed to read and where to get them?
Oh,
Because
all right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I did you get the email that had the schedule for the retreats?
I did not.
Oh, okay, that's fair. Are you, well, anyways, perhaps I'll just find a way to, are you on the group chats?
I don't have access to WhatsApp right now, so I also am not.
Oh, okay, sure. So maybe after now, I'll
Hold on.
find, or maybe you can drop your
Hold on,
email
Daniel. I'll come in here now.
on the, okay.
In the chat box, okay. Because I got the email
No,
for the reminder
no.
of today's class, but I didn't get the email with any schedule.
Let me
Oh,
just
okay.
just give me a minute now. I'll go to my email box because I did send it out to everybody that did indicated interest. And
Okay, let me
I
also
will
check my
just,
spam.
yeah,
That
you
could be a
should. I
concern,
guess you
yeah.
should because I know on the 13th. I'll just go back to my date now.
I think it will be better if you drop your email
Oh,
address
I
in
have
the
an email
in-call
address. Yeah.
messages. We could forward it to you. Just drop your email address in the in-call messages.
Okay, and my second question, Daniel, so when you were,
No,
all right, I'll
you
check
have it.
my
You have it.
spam.
I'll just screenshot this now and send to you. You see, you have it. Yeah.
I have a second question. So when you were
You should, yeah.
talking about character development and creating the personality of your plot, right? You said something about not making the characters to be too whitewashed. So my second question is, for example, at the end of every class, we're supposed to have like a writing assignment and stuff. Does that mean that when we are writing about any story and stuff like that, the setting and the characters have to be like African or Nigerian, or we can be diverse with like our character setting?
Thank you very much for that. So at the end of each class, there are assignments to write and submit. So there are prompts. If you eventually find the schedule, you would see that there are prompts to follow for each writing exercise after each class for each week, right? So the prompts are what are what's going to guide you to the story that you are going to write. So it's not left to me to interpret. It's left for you to interpret however you wish, right? So if you want your character to be African, as long as it follows the prompt, that's okay. If you want your character to be, what I meant by whitewashed is not in terms of race, anyways. It's in terms of writing characters that are too perfect or characters that are too holy, in a sense, that are too innocent, right? Because no human being is inherently innocent. No human being has 100% purity inside of them, right? So that is what I mean when I say that you should not write characters that are whitewashed. So when you look at the schedule and then you find this week's assignment, so you go through the prompts and then you try to interpret the prompts in terms of everything we've discussed on this class about characters, what they're supposed to do, how you're supposed to be able to do them, and like just all of that stuff is what I mean when I say you should not have characters that are too whitewashed, characters that are too pure, right? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense now. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome. So does any other person have any other question or any other clarifications or any other inputs generally? Because this is the end of the fiction. This is the end of the fiction week. So from next week, we'll be going over to non-fiction. And please, I implore you people to go back and like read those stories. It's not just for the purpose of this class. It's also to help you to understand the lessons that we've been discussing and then how you can be able to implement them in your writing, right? So that is why these readings were recommended. Yes, Emmanuel.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Once again, thank you for the session at Daniel. Um, I went through a little of the story, The Dishwasher, and I discovered that the writer employed um, that the writer employed. Excuse me, sir.
Okay, I think
That the writer
Cmonionline is
employed
muted.
brackets. I'm here. As I was saying, the writer employed brackets in the writing. I think it was for further descriptions. So I was thinking, at what point does a description has to be bracketed? Like, can't you just write the whole description down in the original writing instead of bracketing it? So I needed to understand that. Why is it necessary?
So essentially, what the bracket is doing there is what brackets do in any other place that brackets are. Like it just so some people use this when they want to cutting off a kind of a particular detail from the rest of the story, right? Maybe they don't want that detail to obstruct the flow of the story they're delivering, or they feel that that particular information that they're putting in bracket is something that they can't wait to put in any other setting or any other part of the story. So they have to immediately note that down. But essentially, what the bracket is doing there is what brackets do in any other sentence in any other setting. So some people might decide, again, it boils down to choice, right? Some people might decide to have just left that particular description in the body of the story without having to use a bracket, right? So then again, you might also be considering style, right? So maybe the use of brackets seems more stylistic to the writer. That is why they use the bracket to put to like kind of cutting off that detail from the rest of the story. Or it may just be because, well, it's a bracket, it's there. It's not as if anybody says you can't use a bracket when you're writing fiction, right? So it's just doing what any other bracket in any other sentence would normally do. I don't think there is any big deal or any big um how do I put it? I don't think there's any big reason why the bracket is there that you should be looking out for, right? So essentially, the bracket doesn't matter. What matters is that they pass the information to you, and then you know, oh, this information is there. It may be just to like keep your attention on that information. That is why it's in the bracket, right?
Yeah, I get you. I was just surprised. I mean, I use it in non-fiction essays to include additional information. But in that story, it seemed as if it was a continuation of the description she had already begun. So I just thought I should ask. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. You're welcome. So does any other person have any question, any clarifications, or any final thoughts before we call it an evening?
So I would like to know, because at the extent you were discussing about subtext, right? That's the last thing you discussed. So I'd like to know how it differs from the element of surprise. So if you can maybe bring more clarity on that aspect, I will appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So, how subtext differs from the elements of surprise, right? So, when you're talking about surprise, you are speaking in terms of, or you're writing in terms of what um, your reader doesn't have an insight on yet, but then or maybe a change in character attitude, right? That comes off as, oh, this is not this. When people do something in a way that is not really conventional, when someone does something out of the ordinary, then you say, oh, this is unlike this person, right? So that is kind of how you're talking about surprise. So when what your character does, maybe in the end of the story, or maybe in the middle, or wherever, or how they turn out in the end, based on whatever obstacles they face, how that influences them. It could be a surprising turn. It could be something that is quite unexpected to have happened. But when you're talking about subtext, right, what essentially subtext means is that you're talking about something that you're thinking in terms of so you're thinking in terms of what readers don't like. They don't. You're not spoon feeding them essentially, right? So readers are able to kind of draw their own conclusion from this information that you've given them. Like if you think of, say, it's just like where they tell you the advice of. Well, I think you're the person who asked this question last week, anyways. When you're talking about the advice of show and don't tell, right? So it's kind of what subtext is doing. So instead of you saying that a character started crying because they were sad, or that a character got angry and that was why they left the room, right? What subtext is doing is that subtext is going ahead to like, it's just adding an extra layer to that detail by trying to like describe what the environment is, or what is happening, that is able to show what the emotion that this character is feeling, right? So subtext is playing out with what the character says, and then what their facial expression is like. For example, right? Like when someone is on the verge of crying, and then you ask them, "Oh, are you about to cry?" And then they say, "Oh no, something just entered my eye and I'm trying to like blow it away." So what they are telling you is not correlating with what they are experiencing at that particular time. Like they're trying to mask an emotion with another action. That is what something that is underneath, something that is not on the surface, right? Something that it just kind of creates a more nuanced narrative and is able to convey an underlying emotion that a character does not explicitly talk about. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Any other contribution before we call it a day?
So I will appreciate if you maybe give us the resource for this today's lecture later on.
Sure. I'll do that once we drop off the call. So, in the absence of any other question, thank you guys for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you particularly to Simone for this platform. And thank you to every other one of you that made our time to join us this evening. Have a nice
Thank you, guys.
weekend.
Please, before we sign off, let me just say next week, please, let's just try read at least one or two stories. Next week, we are delving into nonfiction, and I am also a learner. Like we are all learners, so I want to learn from you. And in the past few years, my type of learning has centered around virtual discussion. COVID changed everything, so I've been part of different platforms, both for creative writing, both for public speaking, both for writing nonfiction, many things. Even the job I'm doing, we start every morning with scheduling before I hit the road and start taking people to where they go to work. So I've just been learning through this method. But most times you get the resources. You get the resources before whatever class is scheduled, and then you just come a little bit prepared. If you come well prepared, good. So please, for next week, can we try and do some reading? The Bamikole, please check your spam mail. I'm sure I sent it to you. I just screened it, but I've left my home. I'm now in the car, so I'm not sure I can send that screenshot now with this. But check your. I will resend it to you this morning. I'll send it to every other person, and I'll keep sending reminders for people to read. so that it will also help you with the exercises. We don't have much time to do the exercises, but we'll try as much as we can to churn out 1,000 words in 4 or 5 days. We are writers. We have to practice writing. We have to do that, So please do some reading before we meet again next Saturday. Thank you. Continue, Daniel. I'll leave you guys now. I'm driving off.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Please, again, do some reading, please. Becky, you're raising your hand.
It was a mistake.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Thank you all so much, and see you next Saturday. I'll try as much as possible to compile the individual feedbacks, and then I'll send it out to the writers. So, like Simon said, we are all learning, and it takes a lot of practice to get better at this. I'm not yet there. We are all learning, so it all requires all of us to work towards becoming better writers. That is why we are all here. So thank you all so much for joining us, and see you next week, Saturday. Bye.